What if the Confederation won the Civil War? In the 19th century, America was plagued by a divide, namely whether slavery should be abolished or preserved. The northern states, also known as free states, wanted to abolish it, while the southern states, also known as slave states, wanted to preserve it, and the United States constantly had to balance out each other. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln of the Republican Party won the presidential election, which sparked the southern states, starting with South Carolina, to leave the Union and form the Confederate States of America, or CSA. After Confederate forces bombed Fort Sumter, the American Civil War begun. The war lasted 4 years, but it ended up in a Union victory and the abolishment of slavery. But what if that didn't happen? What if the Confederacy won the Civil War? In our own timeline, Confederate General Robert E. Lee launched his Maryland campaign in 1862, as he knew that the longer the war becomes, the slimmer their change of winning becomes. But his battle plans were discovered by Union troops wrapped around a cigarette, and so in Antietam the Union under George B. McClellan defeated him. The Battle of Antietam is still the bloodiest day in American history to this day. In this timeline, the North doesn't find out about these plans, and he successfully manages to cut off Washington, D.C., and soon later take it. Union moral plummets, and they are forced to surrender party because of Anglo-French pressure, and so they sign the Treaty of Paris. The Union has to recognize the Confederate States of America, give them New Mexico, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kentucky, and has to end the blockade. They also have to recognize the Second Mexican Empire, stop supporting the United Mexican States, and end the Monroe Doctrine. Politics in the United States was a mess after that. The Democrats are seen as traitors and Republicans as losers, and so new parties emerge. The Whigs make a comeback as a nationalist party, and the Social Democratic Progressives and Market Liberals are formed. In 1911, the Socialist Party is also formed. No party would win a majority in the Electoral College in 1864, and so the House elected Andrew Donaldson of the Whigs. 1868 saw the same problem, and while he still got re-elected, he abolished the Electoral College in his second term in favor of a direct system. In the Confederate States, Jefferson Davis won re-election in 1864 without a real opposition candidate, but in 1868 the opposition formed the Nationalist Party as a counterforce. But the Democrats had an up their sleeve, namely Robert E. Lee, who won the election of 1868. He died in office in 1870, and his vice president Thomas J. Jackson becomes president and wins re-election in 1872. Meanwhile, the French managed to subdue the Mexicans by the end of the decade, but guerrilla forces still in the desert of the north, mountains of the center, and jungles of the south still fight against French rule. In Berlin, not only do the great powers agree to partition Africa, but also Latin America. France gets Central America, which are integrated into the Second Mexican Empire, but also forms in Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, and Panama the Empire of Gran Colombia under Juan Carlos, who is the Carlist pretender to the Spanish throne. The United Kingdom takes Brazil, which is broken up into smaller colonies of Piratini, Sao Paulo, Vera Cruz, Bahia, Pernambuco, Goiás, and Grapera, and also colonized Germany, establishes Deutsche Silberfluss in Argentina, Chile, Montenegro, and Paraguay, and Spain reforms the viceroyalty of Peru and Bolivia. Unlike in Africa, Italy, Portugal, and Belgium got nothing. The rest of world history progresses, mostly like in our own, like the Russo-Japanese Wars in High Revolution, Bismarck resigning, the Entente being formed, or the Triple Alliance being formed. In 1912, Theodore Roosevelt of the Progressives wins the USA presidential election, and Woodrow Wilson of the Democrats wins the CSA presidential election. In the times after the Civil War, the US moved closer to Germany, as they have the same enemies in Paris and London, as the US blames them for their defeat. In 1914, a Serb kills an Austrian in Bosnia, and so a global war broke out. The United States saw how vulnerable Canada was and launched its invasion. In the Washington front, they managed to take Vancouver and Victoria and move along the coastline to meet up with the forces in Alaska. From North Dakota, they managed to take Winnipeg and reach the lake with the same name, and from New England, they managed to take New Brunswick and lands east of the St. Lawrence, with British forces withdrawing to Halifax. The bulk of the invasion was, however, in Detroit and Buffalo, as they launched an invasion into the Toronto Triangle. And the invasion was a success, as after just a few weeks all of these targets were reached, and soon later the people of Quebec rose up with American weapons, and with a new front opening they managed to take Ottawa. The United Kingdom then decided to withdraw to Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Canadian guerrillas still fight against the US, especially in Alberta and the sparsely populated areas further north. But the Confederates declared war on the US as they feared them becoming too strong and invaded Maryland again, but they were halted by John J. Pershing. He was born in Missouri, but his family was pro-Union, and after Missouri was lost they probably moved to Illinois or Iowa. The power balance has greatly shifted. The Confederate States never modernized and industrialized unlike the North, and now it is the Union with the more capable generals like Tasker H. Bliss, John J. Pershing, or Peyton C. March, while the South just got Charles P. Summerall. It was now time for the North to launch their invasion. In early 1915 they invade Virginia and managed to take Richmond, but Wilson fled to Atlanta. In the East, March managed to retake New Mexico and Arizona and push the Confederacy all the way to the Rio Grande. By the end of the year the Confederacy was pushed to the Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Savannah River. As if things couldn't get worse, a major slave uprising broke out and the Union and the African Americans reunited, meaning only Texas and Florida were left. Texas declared independence only to be conquered by the Union, and Florida was solely kept alive by British and French reinforcements. Woodrow Wilson was captured in Atlanta and Park Trammell became the new president of the Confederate States of America. In summer 1916 the United States launched the invasion of Mexico, and with Mexican rebels they managed to push the French out, who sent most of the garrisons to the Western Front. In Bogota the Emperor of Gran Colombia was overthrown, and the new government joined the American Liberation War. With the Germans who were pushed to the Colorado River and Brazilian insurgents, they slowly pushed out the British out of Brazil. In 1918 German forces captured Paris, and soon later the First World War ended. In the Americas the United States annexed Canada and the Confederation, but with Quebec gaining independence. The Mexican Empire was dissolved, but Gran Colombia survived, but this time as a democratic federation. In Brazil Germany took Piratini and lands from Grã-Para north of the Amazonas and Negro River. The rest of Grã-Para, Goiás, Pernambuco, Bahia, Veracruz and São Paulo become the Second Brazilian Empire under Isabel I. As when Brazil was dissolved by the British the empire wasn't overthrown yet, meaning that the empire was the pre-colonial government. They also take French and British Guyana, West Indies and Falklands. I'm not gonna talk about changes outside of the Americas because I did that in more than enough videos already. The United States managed to turn from a state at brink of collapse to a true hegemon of the New World, and a Cold War over South America begins between the German Empire and United States of America, who are no longer allies. After the annexation of the Confederacy, the Democrats and Nationalists unite into the States Right Party as a new major party, while in Canada the Royalist Party is formed, which aims to re-establish Canada under the Crown. In the South, Jim Crow laws probably never exist in this timeline. In Russia, the Civil War results in a white victory thanks to German help, and the Russian Republic was restored, but Japan didn't withdraw from Siberia and formed the Far Eastern State under Gregory Semyonov. In China, without Russian help, the Northern Expedition fails, and the pro-Japanese Fengtian clique under Zhang Zhaolin remains in power. They also join the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere alongside the Far Eastern Republic. The world would increasingly be divided into a few nations. Germany is the dominant power in Central Europe, Southern South America, most of Africa and parts of the Pacific. The United States dominate North America and South America, Japan in East Asia, and the Entente in Western Europe. In 1937, over a civil war in Spain, the Second World War broke out and Germany quickly launched an offensive into France, while the United States of Greater Austria pushed into Italy and the Ottoman Empire pushed into Egypt, but as they managed to beat the Entente, troubles arrived. Russia launched an invasion into German-held Eastern Europe, and Japan invaded German Indochina and New Guinea. They also invaded the Dutch East Indies. The United States also joined the war and with Brazilian help invaded German colonies in the New World. Germany and its allies managed to win in Western Europe, but then the war froze down until a peace agreement had been signed. Germany establishes the Kingdom of France under Henry VI and Occitania under Louis II. The Spanish state annexes Portugal and Ruslan. Austria puppets Tuscany, Piedmont, Sardinia, Modena and Reggio, and two Sicilies, with the Papal state becoming independent. In Eastern Europe, the Russian Republic annexes all lands east of the Daugava and Dnipro River. Japan takes German and Dutch colonies in the New World and establishes puppet regimes under Bao Dai in Indochina, Sukarno in the Dutch East Indies, and annexes New Guinea. The Empire of Brazil re-annexes its former territories, including Montenegro, while Gran Colombia annexes Guyana Essequiba. The rest of German and Dutch Guyana and the German West Indies become the West Indies Federation, which is a pro-United States regime. In German Rio de la Plata, the United States establishes a pro-American regime. Spanish Peru becomes the Peru-Bolivian Federation. After the war, a Cold War starts between the United States of America, German Empire, Russian Republic, and Empire of Japan. In this timeline, the United States would be much weaker in the late 19th and early 20th century, but would emerge after the World Wars as a dominant force, while the institutions of the South would die, like in our own timeline. But Dixiecrats in the South would be larger and more angry. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.